Well, I told you we still had some G's to look at in this study. One more, in fact, and a pretty big one. Literally and figuratively. A lovely man who goes by the name, or went by the name of Goliath. So many people are familiar with Goliath because the account of David and Goliath has become basically legend in the sense of one of those things that everybody may not know the details, but you say David and Goliath, it's going to be very difficult to find anybody besides maybe a very, very small child that's not taken to Bible class who doesn't know what you're talking about. It is, anytime there's any sort of underdog situation, sometimes it's just called a David and Goliath type situation. It's like David and Goliath. He was the famous giant of Gath, of course, who defied the armies of Israel and who was ultimately killed by the younger brother of some of the soldiers of Israel, whose name was David. So we know he was killed by David, but at this time, David was pretty much nothing more than the younger brother of some of the soldiers in the context of 1 Samuel 17. 1 Samuel 16 is where David is anointed as the next king by Samuel, but in chapter 17 is where not only we are more introduced to David, but the whole world, the whole country at least, I guess nations of Israel and the Philistines got to meet David, or would know the name David for forevermore, pretty much. He was the man, Goliath that is. I sort of changed the name a little bit. The man God defeated with a pebble. We'll see a little bit more about that. We don't really have to look too much into the details because the story is so, the account rather, is so commonly told. And every year at the fair, we get to see people throw beanbags at him for a whole week and a half. So we are reminded of that. But I have to say that, and this may be off topic a little bit because we're not talking about David, we're talking about Goliath, but without taking anything away from the magnitude of the victory, I think we might generally think David was quite a bit younger than he actually was at this time. But anyway, just wanted to make that observation. He was by no means a child in any, even by our standards, or maybe even by their standards. He was not a child. He was the youngest brother of the sons of Jesse, but that doesn't mean that he was a little kid. But he was at least old enough to be out by himself going to the battlefield for his dad to take his brothers their lunch, I guess. Doesn't it say he was taking food? He was bringing them something. So yeah, Dean, do you have something? Okay. Well, if you find it again, just sorry for driving it out. Okay. So 1 Samuel chapter 17. And he's mentioned a couple other places. Chapter 21, chapter 22, maybe 2 Samuel 21. Here's the scene. You got Israel encamped. If we think about ancient battle, war has changed a lot. It is almost not, there are almost no similarities between modern war and back then. You got Israel encamped on one side of this valley. You got the soldiers of Philistia camped on the other side. They're not fighting yet. They're just camped, and everybody knows that eventually the natural course is there's going to be a battle. But one method that, can seem pretty convenient, seems convenient to me, from such a safe distance from any battle, is one man challenging another man from the other side to single one-on-one combat, which apparently was understood and agreed upon that whoever won, their side gets to be counted as the one who won the battle. They win. That seems to be what's going on here. And, it's not exactly fair. I say it's not fair, but if you've got a man who's 9'6", you're going to be challenging for single combat every single time your army's camped. Why wouldn't you? I got a feeling this wasn't the first time Goliath had been in this situation. I don't remember if it explicitly says anywhere that he had done this before, but I just get the feeling, not even from the text, but just the fact that he was who he was and was how he was, they probably used this tactic plenty of times. Because who's going to stand up and fight a guy like that? I'm not. And you know what? Not a single one of the soldiers of Israel was either. So here they are encamped. I got ahead of myself a little bit. Here's the description of Goliath. 6 cubits and a span. The 6 cubits part we can measure somewhat accurately. Not sure about a span. I guess that might be more debated. Maybe there are, of course, speculations on the general measurement of a span, but obviously that's just a little measurement compared to the 6 cubits. If a cubit is 18 inches, 1.5 feet, then that's where we get the estimate for how tall he was. And the cubit may not have been 1.5 feet. It may have been a little bit less. It probably wasn't more, but it may have been a little less. It depends on, the cubit was a measurement from your elbow to the extremity of your middle finger, or I guess your longest finger. For most people, that's going to be your middle finger. Somebody might have a finger that's longer than their middle finger. But at any rate, that's what a cubit is. So naturally, how much a cubit is exactly dependent upon how big the person is that you're, how big you measure it. But I guess on average, 1.5 feet has been a pretty general estimate. So we get about 9'6". Here's more description. He had a helmet of bronze. He had a coat of mail. The weight of his coat was 5,000 shekels. So 1 shekel is said to be about 2/5 of an ounce or 11 grams. So multiply that times 5,000. You got a pretty heavy, big coat. Bronze armor on his legs, a javelin of bronze slung between his shoulders. The shaft of his spear was like a weaver's beam. I don't know what a weaver's beam is. I probably could have looked it up. I didn't. But I get the idea. It was huge. Okay? That's the idea. And his spear's head weighed 600 shekels. So again, 2/5 of an ounce or 11 grams times 600. Big old spearhead. His shield bearer went before him. And here's what he was doing. He would go out within earshot. We don't know how far apart they were camped, but probably a pretty good distance. But he would walk out there, and he, with his shield bearer, says he would shout to the ranks of Israel, the soldiers. Here they are. They're all camped out, right? Why have you come out to draw up for battle? Am I not a Philistine, and are you not servants of Saul? Choose a man for yourselves and let him come down to me. If he's able to fight with me and kill me, then we will be your servants. But if I prevail against him and kill him, then you shall be our servants and serve us. So there's the challenge, one-on-one. And there's the agreement, the gentleman's agreement, I guess you might call it. If I win, you throw down your weapons and you come with us. If he wins, we'll throw down our weapons and come with you as your captives, basically. You win without having to fight. See, that's why it's appealing. It sounds pretty good, doesn't it? One man instead of potentially every man, especially when you got a 9'6" giant on your team. So it got worse, though. That is pretty respectable, pretty standard, just laying out the proposition. Choose somebody, let's do this one-on-one, and not have to mess with all this bloodshed and everything. But that wasn't enough for him. He said, I defy the ranks of Israel this day. Give me a man that we may fight together. And then it just keeps getting escalated and escalated. And we read that when Saul and Israel heard these words, they were dismayed and greatly afraid. You know why? Because they didn't have anybody among them who would stand a chance against this guy. What's that? Yeah, and they knew that. I guess they could just refuse, which they were doing, obviously, but apparently, I don't know, maybe they were also afraid because they didn't even want to fight this guy as an army, you know. Maybe there were some other pretty big guys over there, I don't know. But they were afraid and dismayed because I don't know if it would have been an embarrassment to say no, but what do we do? At any rate, they were not of the mindset to accept his challenge. So it says, now David was the son of an Ephrathite of Bethlehem in Judah, named Jesse, who had 8 sons. In the days of Saul, the man was already old and advanced in years. The 3 oldest sons of Jesse had followed Saul to the battle. So David's 3 oldest brothers were in the army, we would say, in the military. They were among the soldiers. Eliab and Abinadab and Shammah. David was the youngest. Now, David, it says, went back and forth from Saul to feed his father's sheep at Bethlehem. So he would go back and forth. I don't think it's known exactly, precisely where this valley was, and therefore it's hard to give an exact estimate of the distance. But either way, David was old enough that he would go regularly from Bethlehem out to where the battle was, which presumably would be probably as far from any village as you could get it, to tend to his brothers, I guess, you might say. So, for 40 days, it says, Goliath came out and did this. Every day, at some point, morning, afternoon, I don't know. At some point every day, maybe multiple times a day, but for 40 days he'd come out and taunt them, challenge them in all his pomp, with his big old legs and his huge arms and his weaver's beam on his back, or between his shoulders or whatever. It says, Jesse told him to go and take the grain and 10 loaves. So yeah, he was taking home his lunch. Okay, some cheese. Here's your lunch. Just like mom at school, you know. So, David rose early in the morning and he went. Now, it says, he came to the encampment as the host was going out to the battle line. So not only are they refusing his offer, but it sounds like they're actually readying up to begin the traditional battle. We're not falling for that trick. We're going to do this the old-fashioned way. It says, Israel drew up for battle, army against army. David left the things in charge of the keeper of the baggage and ran to the ranks and went and greeted his brothers. As he talked with them, behold, the champion, the Philistine of Gath, Goliath by name, came up out of the ranks of the Philistines and spoke the same words as before. And David heard him. All the men of Israel, when they saw the man, fled from him and were much afraid. Can't blame them. And they were talking about it. Have you seen this guy? Surely he's come up to defy Israel. And the king will enrich the man who kills him with great riches. I bet there'd be a pretty handsome reward for the man who kills him, if anybody's dumb enough to try. I added that part, but I got a feeling that was probably what their thought was. He'd probably give him his daughter and make his father's house free in Israel. It's kind of an interesting statement, but we don't have time to get into that, and it has nothing to do with Goliath. So David heard this, and he started entertaining. What exactly do you think will be done for the man who kills him? This is one thing I love about 1 Samuel 17 is the interaction between David and his brothers is so realistic and true to life, even today. That we have so many cultural differences and time-based differences. Some things in their culture we just can't really understand. We can understand it in an academic sense, but as far as actually personally comprehending how it is, there's a block. But then there are these moments, and they may be few in the scriptures because of that cultural divide, but there are these moments where it's like, this sounds exactly like every group of brothers that's ever lived. So David, the young one, remember, the young, annoying little brat brother that all the other ones hate. They probably don't hate him, but you know what I mean. In the way that siblings hate each other and love each other at the same time. They are mad at David. See, they're the big brothers. They're with the soldiers. Now the little brother is here. He's cramping their style. It's embarrassing, and he's up to no good. He's like, hey, I'm just talking. So he turned away and kept talking to more men like this. Hey, what should be done? He's kind of riling himself up. And the word came to Saul that there's somebody out there who might actually be interested in taking on this giant. Dean, did you remember? Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, so his job at this point was to, obviously he was a shepherd. He was taking care of the sheep. So they're like, what are you doing here? Where are the sheep? Don't you have sheep to tend to somewhere? Basically, it sounds like they're saying, get lost. I know what you're up to. Get lost. And that's why he said, what did I do? Just talking. But then he keeps talking, and Saul hears of it, and it says that he sent for David, and David said to Saul, I'm going to fight this Philistine, and I'm going to kill this Philistine. God is going to help me. So here's Goliath. He's out there. David doesn't like what he's hearing. I believe it is somewhere where when David comes out, Goliath, even more so, digs into this taunting and blasphemy, really. It says, when he looked at David, verse 42, he saw him, he disdained him, for he was but a youth. Again, doesn't mean he was a kid, but he was a youth. That word is very elastic. He could have been, if it's the same word in the Hebrew that I think it is, that word could be used of a 30-year-old. So, doesn't mean he was a kid by any stretch. And he was good looking, and everybody knows good looking guys are never strong. You can't have it all. So, I don't know. It brings up his appearance again. So maybe Goliath saw him. I got a feeling Goliath wasn't that good looking, but he saw him. He's handsome and he's young. He's thinking, this is great. This is the thing. This is what you got after all these days. You finally send someone, and it's this. Yeah, Joe, do you have something?
Well, I keep thinking of the phrase,
Yep.
And in a lot of ways, that's the way we treat sin. The more you get lighter, the more you think you've gotten lighter.
Yep.
And you rely on that scripture, whereas David has a different experience. And all David remembers is what God has done for him and able to do for him. And historically speaking, Jewish people were living. I mean, people were a lot later back then. So the life is huge. If you
Yep.
go to Washington, D.C., and you're trying to go through the Capitol, and you see the doorways and the seats, people were living back then.
Yeah.
And so,
And still are over, the farther you go east, I guess, compared to other places, yeah. But back then, it seems it was even more extreme of a difference.
but it shows what they both rely on.
Yeah.
They were taught.
So you can imagine every time Goliath beat somebody, it would be more and more of a pride and boasting, like, I'm untouchable. Just like today, an MMA fighter or a boxer who goes undefeated, every time they win, every time they knock somebody out, like, Mike Tyson was like a freak of nature almost, and others have, come along in other fighting arenas where they probably get to a point where even if they're trying to tell themselves not to get too cocky, they still think, nobody's beating me. That's why they always say beforehand, I'm going to win this fight. Every one of them. I don't think there's never been a person probably, as far as I know, that ever in the press conference before the fight said, I might lose. Now, he might say he's a great fighter, I'm not going to take him lightly and all that, those things you're supposed to say. But in the back of their minds, they know they're going to win. Even if they lose in the first round, in the first punch, they know they're going to win. So Goliath, yeah, like Joe said, he probably spent a lot of time doing a few things in his life. He probably spent a lot of time getting things off of high shelves for people. He probably spent a lot of time lifting heavy things for people. And he probably, or at least being asked to do that, he probably spent a lot of time trash talking people because what can they do to him? And he probably spent a lot of time beating people up on the battlefield, like we said. So here comes David. Did somebody have a point? Somebody, I thought I saw something over here. Throw something next time, please. So David comes out, and the famous quote, "Am I a dog that you come to me with sticks?" You're throwing me sticks. Talking about David, of course. But then it says this, he cursed David by his gods. I talk about how Goliath probably spent a lot of time beating people up or on the battlefield in this same way. One thing that every single one of those people he beat had in common? They all had gods. And guess what else they had in common? Their gods didn't do a thing to help them beat Goliath. Or maybe they did in his mind and they weren't strong enough. He's cursing David by his gods. There's no quote that it says that give us an example, but it probably sounded something along the lines of, your God can do nothing. What's your God going to do? Isn't that what, maybe it was Nebuchadnezzar, somewhere in there, he taunted just like that. Look at all the gods. All the gods have been able to not even touch me. What do you think your God's going to do? I got a feeling that's the kind of thing that he was saying to David. And don't you know that would have gotten him even more riled up. Yeah. He's no longer defying the armies of Israel. He's no longer taunting him and mocking him. Now he's brought Jehovah into it. And that he's not going to let that slide. Dean, do you have something? Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. He believed with all his heart that God had given him the ability, or been, not just given him the ability, but been with him in those moments so that he was able to kill those animals. And so he knew that God was going to do the same thing now, here. Especially now that Goliath has brought Jehovah into it. That probably gave him even more faith. Like, oh, he can talk bad about us, but oh, he's really going to rue that mistake. He's started trash talking Jehovah. He's really going to get it now. But we shouldn't discount the bravery of David. Like Dean said, this is a man who was with the sheep at least on one occasion, one or two. I highly doubt the bear and the lion were working together, So at least two different occasions, they came up and grabbed one of the sheep, one of the lambs, and he says, if that ever happened, I went out and caught him by the beard and killed him. I ain't grabbing a lion by the beard or a bear. I didn't even know they had beards. But if I ever saw one with a beard, I'm definitely not messing with it. Just kidding. It's almost humorous to think about him grabbing a lion or a bear by the beard and killing it. Not only does that show how much he loves those sheep, it shows how brave he is and how much he trusts God. Sometimes people characterize bravery as, not being afraid, but that's not right. There's another word for not being afraid, and it's not brave. I would call it stupid. And in this case, you might say David wasn't afraid, but in this case, there's a difference. If David wasn't afraid at all, it's because he knew that at the end of the day, it didn't really have anything to do with him. God was doing all this. God was the one that was going to do it. So, he said, this day Jehovah will deliver you into my hand. He told him exactly what's going to happen. I'll strike you down and cut off your head. I'll give the dead bodies of the host of the Philistines this day to the birds of the air, wild beasts of the earth, kind of like what he said I'm going to do to you. And that all this assembly, or that all the earth may know that there is a God in Israel. There is a God in Israel. It kind of implies there's not a God anywhere else. And that all this assembly may know that Jehovah saves not with the sword and spear, not with sword and spear, for the battle is Jehovah's, and he'll give you into our hand. So, here, infamously, I think the rest is well known. David goes out, he gets 5 stones. He goes out. He slings that stone, hits Goliath, and takes him down. And then David gets his sword and he cuts his head off. Lovely picture, right? One thing real quick. If we talk about how Goliath died, did he die from the stone, or did he die from the sword? Well, you got 2 options, and you got 2 verses, and what do? Because verse 50 says, the stone struck the Philistine and killed him. Verse 51 says, David took out Goliath's sword and killed him. Uh-oh. What do? Well, here's what I do. Nothing, number 1. Number 2, verse 51 makes more sense than verse 50. So, as far as I'm concerned, he did kill him, didn't he? But I don't think it's feasible, and this is not doubting the power of God either. I don't think it's logical to suggest that the stone killed him. But it did knock him out. It sank into his forehead. He got a good lick. I mean, he just hit him right square. Perfect hit. It didn't, hit it, bounce off, he really got it in there. Yeah, but it says it both times. I think what verse 50 is saying, I think verse 50 is the long story short version. It struck him, and he killed him. But the fact that it says in verse 51 that he killed him with his sword, with his own sword, is where the question comes in. Because if there was only one killed him, there wouldn't be any question. Even if we want to doubt how a stone like that could kill a huge 9'6" man, we wouldn't have the right to doubt because it says he killed him. But the problem here is it says he killed him twice, and you can't kill somebody twice. So one of the two is the one that killed him, and they're not necessarily. It's not necessarily an automatic contradiction. Yes, sir. Yeah. Yeah, let me add this. The words used in the Hebrew are two different words. So the killed him, let me confirm this. Maybe not. I may have looked at the wrong word. Okay, never mind. I take that back. I was looking at the word smote in the King James and instead of the word slew. So again, it goes back to what I said before. He can't kill him twice. But it's not really an issue. This is just something that somebody might bring up and say, "Look, what killed him? Because did the stone kill him or the sword kill him?" Yeah, David killed him. If it hit him so good that he fell on his face to the ground, he may as well have been dead. Because he's a sitting duck and David wins. And now he gets his sword and he cuts his head off. And then he's for sure dead. So it's a non-issue as far as I'm concerned. Yes, sir. Maybe. Yeah. Yep. I mean, the idea is that he had a helmet on. So it says that he was, it doesn't really say that he went out there without his helmet on. That would be kind of dumb in that situation. But he hit him just like Ahab had all that armor on, and God obviously providentially guided that arrow to hit him in the exact spot in a gap in his armor that ultimately killed him. He guided this stone to perfectly hit Goliath in that spot that neutralized him instantly. Didn't just hurt him. It made him literally, like I said, a sitting duck. So that David just got to walk up to him and unsheath his sword and cut off his head, which probably was not easy. But anyway, do you have something, Zach? Yeah, maybe. Again, he's neutralized. Whether he's literally physically dead already, he's neutralized, and he's won the fight. I mean, once you're down flat on your face, not just on your back even, but flat on his face, again, you're not recovering from that. It's not just like a count out, in boxing. David walks up, and what's Goliath? 9'6" ain't that big when you're laying on your face. Yeah, is he still alive? No, his head's in his hand. He must be dead. Yeah, and I don't guess he had to cut his head off, but he said he told him that's exactly what he's going to do. I'm going to strike you down, verse 50. I mean, he said it in verse 46, but it happened in verse 50, and cut off your head. He strikes him down in verse 50. He cuts off his head in verse 51. Prophecy fulfilled. And what was the purpose? That all the earth may know that there is a God in Israel. How else can you explain? Even if they had fought and, had a big, long-winded fight, and they're trading blows and, it's all suspenseful and everything, David beating him still, I think, would have proved that same point. But that's not the kind of message God wanted to send on this occasion. He was going to leave no doubt. Over the top, you might say. One rock, one hit, the end. It's such a definitive statement of God's power, especially in the face of how cocky he was, and how, like I said, every time they ever faced a battle against anybody, they probably put this guy up there, and he won every single time. Now, but when they fight Israel, this young, good-looking shepherd that's not even he's not even a soldier. He came from Bethlehem, left his sheep, doesn't even wear armor. One shot, the end. Yeah, Dean? Yep. Yep. That was the message. At least that was one application. The lesson was God is. That's what David said. So the world will know, the earth may know that there is a God in Israel. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, not a single one of the actual soldiers who presumably had been trained to some extent in battle. David was the only one who wasn't trained as a soldier, wasn't trained with the swords, not used to wearing armor. That's why he wouldn't wear it. Yeah, Goliath, I get the impression Goliath walked with Goliath, pretty much. That was it.
There's an old song, it's called Through It All, and you thank God for the mountains and you thank Him for the valleys, because if you've never had a problem, you wouldn't know that He could solve it. You wouldn't know what God could do. And the only way you can know what God would do is if you read what He says and walk with Him. He'll show you.
Yep. David knew that from experience. That's why he told Saul, explained it to Saul. Why he's so confident. I'll tell you why I'm so confident, because I've lived through God delivering me from lions and bears. And guess what? You know what? The thing about that lion and that bear, you know one thing they didn't do? They didn't curse God. They didn't come out and taunt God's people and defy them and trash talk Jehovah and God. So what do you think he's not going to help me kill this uncircumcised Philistine? I know he's going to. So, and he did. So yeah, like Dean said, number one, all the earth may know that there is a God in Israel, and that all our people will know something about that God, that he doesn't need swords and spears or giants to win. He can use anybody. We kind of learned that with Gideon. That was a lesson with Gideon. Doesn't need 30,000 men. He didn't even need 300. Well, I'm sure you would love to talk about why David picked up 5 stones, but we're not going to, because we're talking about Goliath. So, sorry to taunt you with that. Number one, and obviously we're not going anywhere near Habakkuk today. So, as the book said, how God delights to use the insignificant things of life to accomplish his purpose. That's what we just said. He doesn't save with swords and spears. He can save with anything. And God has done that repeatedly. Paul made that argument. Look around you, he said. You see any governors and any college professors? Back then, I'm not saying that there aren't Christians that are governors or professors today, but he basically says, you see any of the rich people and the powerful people among you? No, you don't. Did you see me come to you with big words of wisdom and big words of encouragement or world's wisdom? No. God uses foolish things to teach wisdom to the wise, and he uses the weak things to defeat the strong. That's the lesson that was taught in 1 Samuel 17. Number 2, even when God provides victory, he expects us to do our own part. We made the point with Gideon. Did God need 300 soldiers to defeat? No. Did God need David? No. God could have killed Goliath with 0 stones. So why didn't he? Well, we could debate that question for the next hour, but it doesn't matter. Point is, David still did what he could do. He could sling that rock. But who took him down? He didn't have any question about that. God did. Yeah, David? Yeah. Yeah, somebody's always going to try to make something out of something. And more often than not, they make something out of nothing. So I just point out that verse 50 and 51 because it doesn't matter. David killed him. And since it says he killed him in both verses, you can pick whichever one you want to think killed him. If you want to think the stone killed him, then go for it. Yeah, may as well. I mean, the last thing he probably thought, well, let's be real. The last thing he probably thought is, I can't wait to kill this guy. He probably didn't even have time to think about, oh no, here comes that. He's pretty good with that sling, But anyway. Number 3, when you have God on your side, which is only possible by being on God's side, you can't lose. So kind of fitting that, Goliath comes right after Gideon, or at least it did for us here, because that's the lesson. When you got God on your side, by being on God's side, you're not going to lose. Winning is the only option. It's just a matter of how and when. And for David, or for Goliath, he learned instantly, pretty much, that, and everybody else, what it says the Philistines did when they saw, they ran. That wasn't part of the deal, was it? So guess what? The rest of what David said was going to happen happened, and they would have chased them down and put an end to them. So they learned not only by the hand of David, but by the hand of the whole army. Jehovah can't be beat. And so when you're on his side, you can't lose. So be on his side. That will be the application. But make sure you're on God's side so that he'll be on your side, because that's the only way to win, and there's no other option but winning. And we're talking spiritually. That means eternal life in the end, being in heaven with him. There's no other. You can't be with him there if you're not with him here. So be with him here.